Hello everyone, how y'all doing? I very recently watched the most recent video from Mystic, which is honestly one of the most reliable YouTube channels that you have to follow if you're someone that's, interested in PlayStation news overall. This channel as well as Sacred Symbols, which I believe is the name of the is either the name of the podcast or the YouTube channel. I'm not entirely sure. But like in terms of like PlayStation news, this is definitely one of the most reliable ones. But like earlier today, he actually uploaded the video talking about this new DRM that was implemented, the whole 30 days thing, which, everyone has been talking about recently. But then he uploaded a video later today. And this video was very insightful. Now, I'm just going to tell you right now that in general, this isn't really going to change my opinion on the whole situation because I still have the exact same stance that I had when I uploaded my previous video, and I'll explain you why. But it certainly does like offer maybe a little bit more context into what the whole 30 days thing seems to be. And from what I can tell here, it seems to be related to a refund policy that PlayStation has. Now, the thing is, if you've ever, you know, if you've ever tried requesting a refund on PlayStation, you'll notice that their policy is a lot more rigid compared to Steam and other platforms. For example, with Steam, if you wanted to request a refund, then the only thing that they would really be asking you is whether or not A, you bought this within the last 40 days, or two, whether or not you played this for more than 2 hours. PlayStation doesn't really have that. Like, if they like PlayStation's rule as far as like the refund policy, which I believe they call it the cancellation policy, but whatever. Their refund policy is the following: you bought the game within the past 14 days, and you can't have downloaded. Like, if the game was installed on your console, that alone they consider it to be disqualified for refund. And the thing is, what's really messed up is that even if you haven't actually launched the game, technically speaking, that would disqualify it as being eligible for a refund. And you know what's the worst part is that sometimes, let's say for example, I own a physical copy of Yakuza 0, and let's say I played the game in the past, but then, and bear in mind, like, I played the game, I played it for a couple of hours, however how many hours it's been, but overall, there's also like trophy data on my account that's associated with this game. Now, if I buy Yakuza 0 the digital edition, if you go to their website to try to request a refund, it actually won't let you because your account thinks that you've owned this game in the past, even though technically speaking, this is actually the first time you've played the game, and maybe you didn't even download the game, you just bought it, but because the account has data on the game that was from the physical game, it thinks that you're not eligible for a refund. Now, granted, if this does happen, you can probably contact PlayStation support and they will give you the money back because they have ways to check that. But for example, a game like Call of Duty, that's a little bit hard to check because Call of Duty has this thing where they group all their games into one singular Call of Duty HQ, and so if you, for example, if you bought what are the recent Call of Duties? Like if you bought Black Ops 6, you played it, like let's say you bought Black Ops 6 in 2024. I think that's when it launched. And then let's say today you buy Black Ops 7. Now, again, even if you didn't install Black Ops 7, let's say for example, you bought the game, but then you decided, hey, let me play Black Ops 6. Again, you didn't even install the game. You didn't go to the HQ to download the game through there because that's how you typically install Black Ops 7. You literally have to launch the Call of Duty HQ to actually install the game through their launcher. But even if you don't do that, you're not eligible for a refund. So it's a very unfair refund policy that I feel like doesn't take into account a lot of really obscure scenarios. But the reason for why that's the case is it's something that I've noticed for a very long time, ever since I've had the PlayStation. Well, I mean, I know this is a thing that's been around since the PlayStation 3, but I've certainly started noticing this since the PS4, which is the fact that, in general, the PlayStation, in terms of a console, like in terms of its online dependencies, to me, it always felt like it's very easy to exploit it. Like, I've always felt like if you were someone that, like there's a reason, for example, why the whole, account sharing market is so prevalent, because I just always felt like it's always been very easy for you to sign into a specific account, you download a game, you install it, and as long as the console is set as primary, then you essentially have that game there. And like, even if you don't own the account anymore, even if it wasn't even your account in the first place, you just ask someone to log in there. And I know people that have done that. They just ask someone to log into their account, and they install the game, the specific game, and then they never touch that account ever again because it's not even theirs. They just ask their friends to log in there. They don't own that game. They've never paid a single dime for it, but it's installed there. And because it was set as primary, the console just doesn't really ask if you actually own the game. And so I guess the way how I've always seen it is that this whole thing about whether or not it's installed on the console is meant to, like, the reason why it's more rigid is just because of the fact that, with Steam, and granted, maybe other people have more experience with this when it comes to like how the way Steam works, but at least generally in my experience when it comes to Steam, their games, they do very explicitly require the Steam API in order to launch. Of course, with the exception of certain games that actually don't have they actually are DRM free, so you can actually launch it through the executable, like Cyberpunk 2077 and a bunch of games actually, like especially indie games. But the average game, like you can't just launch the exe file. Like you do actually need to have the Steam API launching when the game is up. And and I know Steam does have an offline mode, technically speaking, but in my experience, I've always had the impression that it's a little bit harder to get away with doing that on Steam than it is with at least with PlayStation. So at least that's why I assume why they don't really like that. That's why they have this rule where once you've installed the game, then you're not allowed to refund it. Which again, I do find that to be a very like harsh policy, because like you know there is the thing called what's it called, buyer's remorse. Like people can regret buying a certain game, even like it might take like I don't know, like I remember I didn't buy Starfield, but I did install Starfield that came with a GPU, and like I played that game for 6 minutes and I realized, yeah, this game is not really for me. And thankfully I didn't pay money for that, so it's not like I asked for a refund. But like I don't know, maybe if I did buy that game, I would ask for a refund. I mean, I certainly did ask for a refund for Need for Speed 2015 because the game just wasn't really working correctly because of the EA launcher. But anyway, we're getting a little bit off track. The point I'm trying to make here is that based on and Shrew, and I think there have been some other people in the thread that have sort of corroborated on this. It's just that it does seem like this thing where some people have been able to confirm, for example, if you grab your PS4 and 5, you remove the CMOS battery, and you try launching a recent game, the game will just not work. Like it'll ask you to verify, it'll ask you to connect to the internet to, I believe, to verify like the date and time thing. And now what you see, what this guy seems to be mentioning here is that this is something that you're only really going to notice with games that have been purchased within the past 14 days, because after those 14 days have passed, then the game in theory should work. Because the thing is, this is something that as far as I'm aware, people have taken notice since at least early March. But oftentimes you will see a lot of like conflicting info for some people. Like some people will say like, hey, I don't even see that timer. Like granted, some of the people saying that they say they don't see the timer is like in the PS5, because the PS5 just won't show that. It just won't show the validation period. But in the PS4 you will see it. And yeah, I did notice that like some people were saying, hey, what the hell? Like I don't see it. And some people were like, they were able to launch the game even if they weren't connected to the internet. I read a few comments here where it's like some people said, yeah, I removed the CMOS, and like let me see if I can even find it if I control F. No checks previously, hence why games purchased before March 25th work with no CMOS battery. Okay, this one I don't think. I'm trying to see if I can find. But by and large, digital games work without a CMOS battery before this. I'm trying to see if I can find an example of someone. Um, for example, mm, yeah, I don't know. Maybe not everyone here has tested this because I know that the person that posted this, he has noticed that games that were purchased prior to the 14th of April, which would have been 14 days ago, he says that those games, they work. They work just fine. They're behaving exactly the way it should, because basically what he's noticing is that, the PS4, it will install a license file for the content that you presumably own. I still wouldn't say that you exactly own it, but whatever. But in general, the license that you initially receive when you buy the game within the 14 days, it has a period of 30 days before you need to connect to the internet to validate that you actually own that game. But for example, if 14 days have passed, then in theory, you shouldn't really have that 30-day limit. Like the game should, in theory, be as much of a perpetual license as any other games typically are. Because essentially, they're trying to protect that 14-day period where some people might be able to claim that they're eligible for a refund, but they still have the game installed there. So even if they were to be in that situation, because in the past, if you were to set the console as primary, then at that point, as long as you were not connected to the internet, you could still, in theory, be able to play that game even after you've done the refund. But in this case, with this new rule, maybe you can, but only after 30 days have passed. After the 30 days, you do actually need to connect to the internet in order to double check, hey, do you actually own the license to play this game? And if the answer is yes, then it will convert to a perpetual license where, you know, after you set your account as primary, then you don't really need to like wait, like you don't need to connect to the internet another 30 days to verify the license. And that means that, at least in theory, if you do remove the CMOS battery, then you don't need to validate. And that's the thing, for example, that Mystic did. That's the test that he made. Now, it is worth noting that the game that he tested was technically a game that he obtained for free, in which I believe he was given a code. So this isn't exactly the best game to test this, although, as he mentioned, and it's kind of true, where it's like PlayStation typically, they don't really discriminate licenses of games whether it was paid for it or not, and so this should in theory be a viable test. But I'm gonna be honest with you, maybe it would be worth it if it were someone else that can confirm that they bought something with money within, like, after 14 days have passed. I can't really test this because I don't really buy games digitally. I did buy one game, and I don't know, maybe I will disconnect the console from the internet just to be sure. In fact, I'll do that later on after I'm done recording this video, just to be sure. I'll test the game after 14 days just to see if. I mean, I don't have the timer because I'm on a PS5, but I will. After the 14 days have passed, I will. I first want to be sure that the game will actually refuse to launch, because that's the first thing I do need to check, and it probably will. But then afterwards, I'll connect it to the internet just to verify the license, and then I'll wait. I don't know, 30 days at that point. It would be a very long time, but whatever. Oh, actually, wait, no. Actually, no, that's kind of a bad test because you can't actually do it with 14 days. You have to do it at 30 days. So, yeah, that would be a very long time. I mean, I don't really use my console to connect to the internet, so maybe it wouldn't be an issue to me. But, like, I don't know. This is something where, and honestly, when this story started to break down, there were a lot of people that said that, like, can you really 100% verify that what you're saying is true? Because, 30 days haven't really been passed for most people. But I don't know, if anyone can test these conditions. Like, you bought a game, like, first of all, if you're someone who bought a game before the 14th of April, can you verify that there is a bit of a correlation between these two dates? But beyond that, if you are someone that bought a game recently, try try connecting to the internet now, and then wait 14 days, and then try removing the CMOS battery, which I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna remove the CMOS battery on my console because I'm not that invested in this drama to really do that. But if you are someone who's able to do that, try making that test because I am genuinely curious. Because if this is what's going on, then I think it would make a little bit more sense. But I am gonna tell you right now, this isn't really going to change my opinion all that much because overall, I still think that you are buying licenses that have dependencies to the internet because I can still think of a couple of scenarios where you're still gonna be required to connect to the internet. For example, if the software on your console gets corrupted, or if you do a factory reset, or maybe even if you rebuild the database in some instances where if the system is really corrupted, it's like I do still think like there's still quite a few scenarios that can actually trigger the console to actually recheck the licenses. And so like I personally like when I heard this story, like I wasn't as upset as other people, but the reason for why I wasn't as upset is because I've already had a pretty negative opinion on digital games even before this drama started to take place. I've already had a pretty overall disdainful stance when it comes to digital games because I think that regardless if this 30-day thing is real or not, which it is real, like this is actually a real thing, but regardless of like the actual extent of the effects, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because at the end of the day, you are still buying games within an online environment where the main way that PlayStation verifies that you actually have the license to play this game is through checking whether or not you actually own the account in some way or another. And so I do feel like at some point it the console will eventually want to validate that you actually own this game through to verifying your ownership of the account. And so I still think this is going to be a problem regardless. But at the very least, to all the people that for some reason deluded themselves into believing that you can buy your games digitally and own them, then well, I guess I have news for you. At least for 14 days, or at least after the 14 days, you can you can continue to pretend like you own these games. But I'm just gonna say it as it is. You never owned these games in the first place, and if you really want to own games, buy games physically, and that's all.